All right. Well, welcome once again, everyone, to the Spooning a Bear Book Club. If you heard the pre-chatter that Tori and I were doing, today's probably not going to be a very long day of talking about the book. We're only going over one chapter today, which is chapter 16, and it's titled "Go Away, Bear." Um, and I'll actually get to my one and only slide for today. And so, what if you guys have been reading along? You know that I have a little bit of flair to my writing. I try to include some humorous anecdotal incidences, and I will say 98% of them are 100% true. I may stretch it a little bit. If you read this chapter, I had such a good time rereading this chapter yesterday, as a matter of fact, because it brought back all the memories of this particular event. But I do embellish things a little just to tell a slightly more entertaining tale. But jumping right in just to describe this, and like Tori said, if anyone, after we're done with me talking about this particular chapter, if anyone has any amusing stories or tales or anything, by all means, I'd love to hear them. This is just one of those tales that I experienced that when all was said and done, like when I was going through it, I was like, I cannot believe I'm going through this. But then when all is said and done, it's the thing that really makes memories. And if you recall, I mentioned in a previous chapter, some of the greatest memories we have, especially like years and years after the event takes place. Typically, the memories we hold on to the most are the ones where things go really, really weird and outside the norm. And so those are the things that really strike deep in our psyche and in our brain, and we can remember them the most vividly. It's because things do not go the way you are expecting them to go. So this particular chapter is a story about when I was obviously working at the Bear Center. We're really brand new, really like not exposed to a lot of outside folks. And so one of the things that we were really looking forward to, myself and my wife at the time, is we're in the middle, living in the backwoods of Townsend, Tennessee, down it was a dirt road at the time. Nowadays it's paved. But the Bear Center was located way down a dirt road, almost a mile off the beaten path. And so when we first moved there, we're thinking, man, it's going to be pretty lonely out here. There's not going to be many people to come visit. And much to my surprise, and I would think I was actually pleasantly surprised, we had a lot of folks that would come to visit us. For those that don't know, I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. And so moving from Buffalo, New York down to Tennessee, 700 miles, over 700 miles away, we didn't think we'd had that many visitors. And so after we stuck it out for the first year, we started getting more and more people coming to visit. And this included like friends and family, and also included more distant family. And at first I'm thinking, man, we must be pretty popular that we're having all these visitors drive from so far away. And then I don't know who reminded me, but they more or less pointed out, don't you think it might not really be you that they're coming to visit, and they're actually coming to visit Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge? And then I put two and two together and and realized I was kind of serving as a cheap hotel because we had always put up family and friends whenever they would make the drive to Tennessee. Well, lo and behold, one day we got a call that a cousin of mine on my wife's side was gonna take a ride down, and that was my cousin Beverly, and she was gonna come down with. She had a young daughter, but she was gonna come down with her new boyfriend, which was fine with us. We enjoyed having visitors because we didn't get that many visitors when we were working at the Bear Center. And lo and behold, they eventually showed up in our driveway after driving almost 12 hours to get down to see us. And my first thought, because I had never met, I met my cousin Beverly before, but I had never met her boyfriend. And so he came up and everyone was introduced. And literally, the first thing out of his mouth was how he just got out of the military and he used to jump out of airplanes. And I just thought it was a little weird. That's usually not the first thing you tell people. But the first thing I want to say is military folks are awesome. I met my sister was in the Marines. We just celebrated Veterans Day. I can't say enough about anyone that serves our country. They are fantastic. Having said that, in fact, I just got off the phone with one of my best friends who's served 20 some years in the military as a military doctor. And he laughed when I was recounting the story today because he said, yeah, Daryl, I see it all the time when folks first get out of the military, especially out of basic training, they have this bravado about them that like they're really gung ho about life, and that is probably the best way I could describe. And I used an alias for him. That's the best way I could describe Bill. He was really gung ho about being there, and it was kind of funny because I don't think he really believed that I actually worked with bears. And so when he found out that I really did work with bears, he wanted to go down and see him. And fortunately, I did not do that. Even with family and friends, we never exploited the bear. We never went down and showed him to any folks that weren't supposed to be down there. So he was a little disappointed in that. And so the whole time that Bill was visiting with us, he was really wanting to work with the bears. Now, prior to their arrival, I mentioned in this chapter that I was thirsty. I was a brand new biologist. Although I was working at the bear center, pretty much all the bears I worked with were 20 pounds or less. So I never really worked with the big boys. Never really worked with anything larger than maybe 50 pounds. And so I used to visit Kim Delosier all the time and at the headquarters. He was the head biologist for Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And I told him, I said, Kim, I would love to get more bear experience. Anything you've got, just by all means, give me a call. I'd love to volunteer and help out. And he always had a cadre of technicians that would do most of the bear work inside the park. And so he said, yeah, if Daryl, if something comes up, I'll give you a call. And that was like months before my family visit there. And so never had any volunteer work come up. And lo and behold, after I got my visitors from back home, I received a call from Kim and he said, hey, Daryl, I got a project for you. You've been wanting to get some volunteer work done. I got a favor to ask. He said, campsite number 10 in the park, which is it's off a trail going on into the park towards Cades Cove. He said, campsite number 10, we've had it closed for a couple of weeks because there was a bear that was getting into the campsite at night, kind of looking, scrounging around for food. And we've had it closed for a while, and we just need someone to go back in there, hike back in there, camp out at that campsite, and just report back on bear activity because we want to know if it's okay to open it back up to the public. And so I was like, absolutely, Kim. Whatever you need, I'm more than happy to do it. So he was thankful for that, and we arranged that I would head up to that campsite later that night. And so I was really excited. I hung up the phone and I was telling my wife about it, and it dawned on me as I was relaying the story. I'm like, yeah, Kim wants me to go up there to this campsite. They had a lot of bear activity, and he wants me to camp there to see if the bear's coming back in. And it dawned on me that he was using me as bait. But I was so thrilled because he had faith in me that I could handle myself in case the bear came in. And so the more I thought about it, I was like, "Ooh, this is going to be a fun experience." And so I was kind of wishing, like, maybe if I had someone that could go with me, it might make it a little less worrisome on my behalf. And it dawned on me, I got cousin Bill, or cousin-in-law, or soon to be cousin-in-law Bill. And so they were off that day somewhere in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg, enjoying all the amusement rides. And so when they came back, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I told them, I said, hey, Bill, guess what? I got some bear work for you to do. And he's like, oh, really? That sounds great. And so I told him what the plan was, and he was all gung ho about it. In the meantime, we had a run to, if you read the chapter, I had some gear. I was definitely not very well off. We were scrounging just to get by, so I didn't have a lot of extra gear. And so I made a little pile of all the stuff I had, and I had a couple flashlights, sleeping bags, things like that. But the one thing I was missing was a tent. I didn't have a good tent. Couldn't really afford to go to a name brand store. So I ended up going to Walmart to try to pick up a tent that we could stay in that night when we went to the campsite. And lo and behold, the really good tents that are in the camping section, they were a little bit out of my price range. And this is back in the late 1990s. I had less than $20 and I was looking for a really, really cheap tent. And their cheapest tent was closer to $30. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? And then it dawned on me, I wonder if they had any kids' tents in the toy section. And sure enough, I found, I guess the best way to describe it is kind of like a Charlie Brown tent. It was just a green tarp, A-frame type of thing, had a little floor to it, but it was really, really small. But it was the only tent I could afford. And so I bought that tent and headed back to the Bear Center because Kim wanted us to go camping that night. And so when I pulled in the driveway, I was greeted by a National Park Service truck. Bill Stiver, who was another biologist with the park, he actually succeeded Kim after Kim retired. But Bill had stopped at the Bear Center to pick up a supply or two. I forget what he was needing. And so the funny thing is, I'm talking to Bill, and he's like, "So Kim is really sending you to Campsite 10?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And he's like, I'm just surprised because he's like, the bear that was visiting that campsite was rather aggressive. It actually grabbed someone by the boot when they were sleeping and like tried tugging them out of their tent. And like, oh. So all this I was kind of taken aback, but I'm like, okay, I can do this. I'm gonna be a biologist. I gotta be a bear biologist. I can't be frightened away. Anyway, I've got someone else to go with me. I got Bill who I could take up there with me. And so anyway, Bill Stiver, the good Bill, he bid me farewell. And he told me, he said, "Good luck. Just be careful. Take some bear spray as you go." So after Bill left, I was like, this is going to be an adventure. So I finished rounding up all the gear, the backpack, the tent, sleeping bags. They wanted me to cook something out as like really pretend I'm really overnight camping to put some food smells in the area just to make sure that if any bears were in the area, they're not coming back into that campsite. So I was all prepared, kind of trying to stay calm, stay confident. Even though in the back of my mind I was still a little like, this is going to be a exciting little trip. So anyway, I told Bill, I said, "Hey, are you ready to go? We gotta head up to campsite 10." And I looked at my watch and it was already after 5 o'clock. And I estimated it'd take us about 3 hours to get there. We had about a 45-minute drive to get to the parking area and then maybe another hour and a half hike and then pitch and camp right before dark. And so we drove up into the park. We got to the parking lot. And sure enough, there's one vehicle pulling in. So I was a little relieved there's going to be other people on the mountain with us. But as soon as I pulled in, that car pulled out. So we were the only vehicle there. We were going to be the only people up on this mountain at this particular time. And so I grabbed everything. And one of the things I used to always carry with me, it was a walking stick that I carved when I first started working at the Bear Center. And there's nothing special. It's not too sentimental, but it is a nice little walking stick, but it's rather heavy. So I figured it could be a little nice little self-defense as well as a can of bear spray. But I had the bear spray clipped on in my pack, so I wasn't really carrying it. Anyway, I gathered up everything and I put my backpack on, which had all the supplies, tent, sleeping bags, and everything, and looked over at Bill, who was joining me, and he was just in his little his t-shirt and his jean hiking shorts. He didn't have anything to carry, and so thought it's kind of unfair, but he's on vacation, so all right, I'll carry all the stuff up there. So lo and behold, we get ready to get on the trail, and I had never visited Campsite 10 before. And I asked him, I said, "Hey Bill, can you pull out the map? I just want to make sure where we're going." And I look at the map, and it looked to be about a mile, mile and a half up the main trail. And then another trail, it intersected with another trail. And when we came to that trail, we would just make a right and maybe walk up another mile. And it was going to be uphill the whole way. And so I knew it was going to slow us down a little bit. And so it's okay, pretty easy. You go straight until you hit the first trail and you make a right, and then it's another mile up there. So we put the map back and we started hiking. And it's about an hour and a half before sunset. And so we start the walk up the hill. And for those that don't know, when you're trying to gauge distance, when you're hiking, you can get a good idea of the distance you hike based on the amount of time it takes. And it takes some while to figure out what your particular pace is. I'm not a very fast hiker at all, so like 3 miles per hour is about what I typically do. And so I figured we should be getting up there to campsite 10 right before dark. We have about 30 minutes to set up our campsite. So we start hiking up the hill, and the one thing I distinctly remember, it was hot. It was one of those hot, humid days. And so it was high 80s during the middle of the day, and it's right before dark, and it's like low 80s. And it wasn't expected to get too much cooler, like upper 70s. And so I don't know about you, but hiking uphill, I'm not a big fan of doing it, but it was a trudge going all the way up. And so obviously hiking uphill, it's a little bit slower pace. And so we get, we're only like 20 minutes in. And so I didn't think we hit the mile yet. But I knew we were getting close to our intersection. And I was talking to Bill, and he's like, "Where is this intersection?" You could tell he was already getting frustrated, which surprised me because he was fresh out of the military. He could do this stuff in his sleep. But you could see he's all sweated up and getting tired. And he swore we had already hiked well over 3 miles. And I'm like, "No, it's only about a mile up here." He's like, "Well, it's got to be around here somewhere." And lo and behold, we turn the next bend and there's another trail intersecting. And I was like, huh, finally we get to it. But something in the back of my mind was like, I still didn't think we hiked far enough, but I was glad to see that intersection. So we make the right-hand turn, we begin walking, and our uphill kind of leveled out, and I figured we'd just be walking along the contour of the mountain. And then it started going downhill, which I kept quiet. I probably shouldn't have kept quiet, but I'm like, I didn't think there was any downhill to this hike. And so we walked a bit more, and it's time's passing by, and we're walking further and further, and it starts getting steeper and steeper downhill. And we get to the bottom of the hill, and lo and behold, there's my Jeep sitting there. I was like, oh my gosh, I just walked us in a big circle. And the coolest, the funniest thing I remember is I looked at Bill, and Bill saw the Jeep, and he's like, "Son of a gun, Daryl! Like, I really wanted to do this bear work tonight." And I kind of didn't understand what I'm like, "We're still doing it." He thought like once it got dark, you don't do things in the woods anymore. So he thought the hike was over. I said, "No, we're still going." And so I pulled out a couple of the flashlights. I had a little headband flashlight, and I gave him a flashlight. And I said, "No, we're still going. We just got to start heading back up." So as I walked by the Jeep, I tapped it. I said, "All right, lap one," and we started back up the hill. And so by this time, it's dark. And he could not believe that we were actually hiking in the dark. And I cannot believe he was questioning we were hiking in the dark because he was telling me about all these crazy stuff he did in the military. And so anyway, I put it out of the back of my mind. We continue up this hill and we're trudging along. And I forget the reason why, but I stopped for a second to turn around to see where he was. And I swear when I turned around, he was right there. He was no more than 3 inches off my backside. And he was like right on top of me. I'm like, well, what the heck's going on? And he was a little nervous because I had all the weaponry. I had the hiking stick and the bear spray. And so he was feeling a little vulnerable, I guess. And so I ended up giving him my hiking stick and giving him the bear spray, and those things never left. He had them clenched in his hands the whole time. And so we continued our hike. We got to the point where that first trail we cut down, I'm like, now we know we don't turn here. And sure enough, it wasn't but 100 yards beyond that we found the real trail with a big old sign that said campsite 10 this way, and I was pointing to the right. So we knew we were on the right trail. We continued hiking in the dark, kept going uphill the whole way. So we're a few miles up the hill. We finally get to this clearing that's campsite 10, and it's not much of a clearing. It was kind of what I was dreading. If you know anything about the Smokies, it's pretty thick vegetation in some areas. And we were in this giant monstrosity of a rhododendron patch. And so it was super, super thick, but there was a clearing where you could pitch a tent. And there was a little sign saying campsite number 10. And I'm thinking, oh, great. You could have any animal, especially a bear, walk 10 feet away from you and you wouldn't even know it's there because it was so thick. I'm like, all right, well, this is where we're going to be. And little spot to put our tent there. I remember there was a little log laying there. So I said, Bill, why don't you have a seat? I'm gonna get the tent ready. And so I began assembling my little Charlie Brown tent. I brought some food. Again, I was super poor, so I had like ramen pride. But I really wanted to do a good job for Kim and the Park Service, and so I brought up a big old jar of peanut butter because I knew that was going to be really aromatic. And if there was a bear in the area, I wanted to be able to report back on it. And if there wasn't, I can confidently say nothing came in. And so we finally got everything all set. I was getting pretty tired, but I didn't eat anything. So I cooked up the ramen pride and asked Bill. He apparently lost all his appetite. He didn't want to eat or anything. But he was still sitting on the log with his hiking stick or my hiking stick and his trusty old bear spray. And so I sat there, ate up, enjoyed myself for a little bit, cleaned up as much as I could. And there was really nothing else left to do. And I looked at my watch and it was already approaching midnight. I'm like, oh, this was such a long day. All the running around, all the mental and physical work I did to get up there. And again, I was somewhat thankful Bill had accompanied me. And so I told him, I said, well, I'm gonna hit the sack. It's getting pretty, I'm pretty worn out. It's pretty late, so I'm turning in. And he's like, all right. And his plan was to stay by the campfire for a little bit. I don't know if he was watching guard or what he was doing. And so I crawled into the tent, and again, it's a small tent, and we had two guys in it. And I got in there, and it wasn't but 10 seconds later, he's like, okay, I think I'm turning in too, because I think he realized that once I went to bed, he would be sitting alone out there. And so he decided to come into the tent and he asked about how he should lay, and it kind of froze me for a second, but I told him he could lay any way he wanted because I'm going to bed. And so sure enough, went in there, and after that, it was I should say it wasn't quiet. I mentioned the cicadas were like deafening. It was one of the larger hatches. So he didn't know what those sounds were. I fell asleep to the sound of cicadas all the time because I lived at the Bear Center and we had no air conditioning, so we had the windows up all the time. And so it was something I was used to hearing, and it helped me go to sleep. So sure enough, I fell asleep within a very short period of time. And then that's when it happened. And I saw it as plain as day. And if you read in the book, I have this wonderful description of this huge, menacing looking bear walking into camp, kind of going over exactly where we were standing, where he was sniffing, where I cooked the ramen pride. He went over to where I had the peanut butter on the log, and he was huge and scary looking. And he kept walking around the campsite, in between the tent and the campfire. And he got to this point where he found a face rag that Bill had used to dry up some of the sweat on him. And the bear was sniffing that rag and it was getting worked up. The bear was beginning to salivate and just getting really, he was breathing heavy and just getting really worked up, smelling this rag with Bill's scent on it. And I was freaking out because like this was scary, scary stuff. A huge bear, and I really don't have anything with me in that tent. And sure enough, I turned looking for a flashlight, looking for the bear spray, and I turned and the bear was pressing his nose up against the tent. And that's when I freaked out. And I started yelling, "Go away, bear, get out of here." And I was doing whatever I could to scare that bear away. And then I don't remember anything after that. And it was probably a few hours later, I was waking up because I could feel the sun coming through the front of the tent. And as I was getting my faculties and my bearings, like I realized, oh, I was still sleeping. And then it dawned on me as I'm sitting there, I'm remembering this bear, and I'm like, oh, it was the biggest relief in the world because I realized I had dreamt that bear coming into the campsite. Never really came in real life. It was all a dream. But then I realized I've got this horrific trait where every once in a while I might talk in my sleep, especially if it's a nightmare. My son had night terrors and everything. And so if I get really worked up because of a nightmare, I might scream or talk in my sleep. And so at this point in time, I was still like had my eyes closed. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I do what I think I did? And that's when I rolled over to see if Bill was still in the tent with me. And he was. He wasn't laying down though. He was curled up, like with his knees almost rocking back and forth like a little kid. And he was white as a ghost with like sweat coming down. And I remember, like, he was finishing my sentences. I'm like, Bill, did I talk about? He's like, you're dang right you did. And I'm like, did I say something about a bear? And he's like, yeah, there was a bear. And he was so wigged out. And I couldn't help but laugh. He didn't think it was funny at all because he never slept a wink that whole night. And so I kind of felt a little guilty, not too guilty, but I remember packing up. He was more than happy to come off that mountain. And that whole entire ordeal lasted less than 24 hours. I know I'll remember it for the rest of my life. I'm pretty sure he's going to remember that for the rest of his life as well. But we never ever saw any signs of any bear up there. And I happily reported that back to Kim, and they opened up campsite 10 soon after that. But the funny thing is, he was so gung ho about getting his hands on bears, like he never wanted to hear or see another bear as long as he lived. Ironically, we never saw a bear on the hike. We got back to my Jeep, loaded up everything, and when we were exiting the park to go back home to my place, we actually almost hit a bear with the Jeep, and so that was the only bear we saw on that trip. But I will never remember that time that I was camping with Bill and I was screaming during the middle of the night about "Go away, bear!" And I think I almost gave my almost cousin-in-law a heart attack. So that was the story. If you read chapter 16, that was that particular event. And so I thought it was worthy of a retelling in my book because I'm sure there's at least two people who will never forget that story. So anyway, does anyone have any questions about, well, you can ask any questions you want about that particular story, but I really wanted to know if anyone ever had any type of really cool, whether or not it's funny, scary, anything, outdoor stories that you've ever encountered. And I hate to put people on oh, I see Greg joined us. Or no, that might have been, is that Katrina?
No,
That's
no,
on.
I'm here.
No, he
I'm
did
Oh,
here.
you
join.
are.
Yeah, Greg. I didn't know you were gonna hop on. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm sitting in Denver Airport, so I figured I'd
Oh,
I'd jump
ah,
on here. My flight board's in 30 minutes, but yeah, I
oh,
just joined in while you were telling the story about getting to
Couldn't help
campsite
himself.
10.
He couldn't miss a book club.
Do you,
No.
well,
Greg
I
or
appreciate that.
Katrina, do you guys know Campsite 10? Is it still 10?
Oh, I
It's a
hate
different
campsite
it's a
10.
different spot, isn't it, Greg?
Well, not from when he was probably Daryl, when you went to campsite 10, it was up Russell Field Trail,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
But it's on the right after that footlog bridge in that rhodo thicket, or
It
was it
was in a
lower?
rhododendron thicket. Is
Yeah, it's still in a rhodo. It's a terrible campsite. I tell people all the time it's an awful campsite, and there's
yes.
always bears. There's always bears at it, and I've probably spent no less than like 15 or 20 days of my working career in the park at campsite 10 because it's close enough you could hike there in a day to
Yeah.
try and go catch a bear that's showing up. And there was one time that, I mean, the one time out of many that we closed campsite 10 because, bears getting people's food and packs and stuff there. And one time I went to campsite 10 5 days in a row to try and catch a bear. And I sat there from like 2 p.m. to dark every single time and then hiked out in the dark. And I even left a snare set one time and left the campsite because the bear would show up after we left every time. Now that's how it wasn't the worst bear in the world as far as behavior goes, but he would be so close by and we would never see him and then we'd have a camera left because back in the day, you didn't even have game cameras, right? But we'd leave a game camera there and the bear would show up the moment we left. And then we'd even try to like leave and pretend we're leaving and then come back and
Hmm.
he'd know. So I hate campsite 10 with a passion. It's right up there with campsite 37 and some others that I spent too many nights or days of my life at trying to catch something, you know.
Yeah, it
So
was like I did not have near as many trapping experiences as Greg and many or all the other technicians in the park. Jay Clark, who joined us a couple of um, book clubs ago. I used to work a lot with Jay when he was a student under Mike Pelton at the University of Tennessee, and he was studying bears in the park. And Kim relied on Jay quite a bit to do a lot of bear trapping. And I remember one time he was trying to catch a bear up on Mount Sterling on the North Carolina side, and I bugged Kim, I bugged Jay. Anytime you need help, let me know. And so Jay called me and asked if I wanted to go with him up to Mount Sterling because they had to snare a bear that was getting up into the campsite there. And it was funny because we got up there and there was already a couple of tents set up at this below the viewing tower at Mount Sterling. And we talked to them. We're like, and they were asking, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Because Jay started setting up a snare to capture this bear, and we said there's a bear that's coming around. That's we're trying to get a collar on it, and it's a pretty big bear. And so we told them we're setting these traps trying to capture this bear in this campsite, and we disappeared for a little while. We came back and they were gone. They did not want to. They had no idea that the bears were coming in at that time, and they didn't want to be in there if we
yeah.
catch a bear. So
Yeah, that would be pretty funny when you show up to an AT shelter or another campsite and people be like, "What are you doing?" I'm here to catch a bear, and they'd be like, "Should we leave?" And I'd be like, "Well, I'd rather you stay because he's going to come here. The more food that we have, and the more people." And I can't tell you how many times I'd have a bear that would be showing up to a campsite when there's a ton of people there, a real food conditioned bear that keys in on, hey, there's a lot of people there, there's a lot of food there. And then when we would close the campsite and you'd go there by yourself, he would never show up when you're there by yourself. It's like he knew not anything there for me, or he knew the park rangers there and it wasn't worth it that day. I don't know. Sometimes I I like to think they knew the smell of the guy who was going to try and you know put a tag in their ear.
Just
But
like they know a green truck when a
they
green
knew the
truck.
truck. Yeah, yeah, they knew the truck. I mean, there's times where there'd be a bear that showed up at Mount LeConte 10 days in a row, and then the day you went up there, it didn't show up. Stayed up there for 3 days, didn't show up. Day left, it shows up again. So there's got to be something to that.
I'm going to read something that Kay Bar Baggis just wrote. She said, "All I can add is National Park Service Yellowstone guidance on hiking in bear country. One year they say wear bear bells, so we get bear bells and hike. The next year we show up in the with the bells, and the rangers say bells, heck no, that's a dinner bell for a grizzly. So we ditch the bells. That year the rangers said you have to constantly yell, "Hey bear!" So we yelled, "Hey bear!" during the hours long hike. The next year the ranger said, "No, don't yell, hey bear. That can scare others, making them think that there's a bear there, and they'll run." And any bear will chase them. Just talk loudly the whole time. So that year we just talked loudly. Anyway, she went on to say it's kind of like the soup du jour of guidance where it changes all the time. And there's some truth to that because there are some bears that respond to certain stimulus and other bears that don't. When it comes to the whole bear bell stuff, there was some thought that in areas where there's a lot of people and a lot of people ringing little bells because they have them on their hiking poles or on their boots, the bears just become habituated to it. They just pay no attention to it. And so it depends on what kind of stimulus are used in specific areas, and bears will adapt differently to it. So yeah, you better have a whole menu of things you could throw at them if if you're trying to scare a bear away, because what works on one bear may not always work on the next bear. So that's a really good comment.
Yeah, and Daryl, I'll say, having worked in Yellowstone one season, I feel like I talk about what's called the grizzly bear fear propaganda, and I'm sure you've seen some of it. Sometimes, some of the interpretive rangers and education rangers, they exaggerate a lot of these things to, scare people into following rules and doing things right. The thought that well, if you have food with you, you might attract a bear. It's like, well, everyone goes camping with food,
Yeah.
right? And how many of them, and that type of stuff. And they'll say that to people though, right? And I think the whole thing with the grizzly bear, hey bear, the bells, you can only hear bells from so far away. And I did some surveys in Yellowstone when I was there. We'd actually go hiking on trails and count how many people were carrying bear spray, carrying guns, carrying bells. And the thing is, with bells, we never knew someone had a bell on them until we were face to face with them. And we would always joke that we had to look at someone to know they had bells. Because we couldn't hear them most of the time,
Yeah.
unless it was a really superb bell. And so, with alerting grizzly bears to your presence, I think it's really just the louder you can be, and whatever the noise is. If it's hey bear, if it's talking loudly, if it's singing, if it's playing music, it helps you prevent from startling that bear at a closer distance, which ultimately is where the negative encounter happens, right? You want to have 50 yards between you and a grizzly bear. If it's going to charge, that gives you some time to spray the bear spray. But
Yep.
at 10 yards, it doesn't matter if you yelled hey bear or if it was a bell. At 10 yards, you don't have time to react. In thick country especially, you could be in the willows or something, and a bear's got its head buried. And so, I think that some of that grizzly bear propaganda really scares people. Being in groups is your number one best bet, and bears respect groups. That's my best advice.
Oh, 100%. When I just did my quote unquote green fire tour, we were up in Greater Yellowstone a couple of weeks ago, and there was a number of folks that wanted to hike. And my rule of thumb, you no matter what, you got to have at least two people. I didn't want anyone hiking by themselves. But if you look at all the studies, most negative interactions with bears, it's usually a single person, whether or not it's a hiker or hunter. Um, when there's two people, the odds go way, way down. And when there's three people, it's almost non-existent. So,
Yeah, four I think is down to like 0.1%, four people. And if it's more than four, it's basically never happened, right?
right.
Yeah,
So
real negative
I would
experience.
always have a couple of couple of people, two or three people that wanted to hike, and I always send along one of my guides to go with them. So they always had a group. I always felt really safe. Obviously, we used everyone was armed with bear spray, but an interesting thing when it comes to interactions or encounters with predators, so to speak. A lot depends on how much human exposure they've had. Like when you're in truly wild areas, the scariest thing for many of those animals, and I'm talking about not just grizzly bears, black bears, cougars, they did a study where the scariest sound that you can make is a human voice. Because a lot of times animals, especially predator animals, true carnivores like a cougar that has to find meat to eat every day, they're always on the hunt. They're always looking for their next meal. And you hear so many stories about, oh, this cougar was stalking me. Most of the time when that happens, the cougar isn't really stalking a human because humans are not on the menu for them. They hear something walking, but they don't know what it is, and so they automatically go into that predator mode. They act like a cat. If you ever watched your cat stalk a mouse or anything in the grass or a bird in the grass, they get into that crouch and they're real sneaky. And that's what a lot of these larger animals do when they hear something coming, but they don't know what it is. But then as soon as they hear a human voice, they're gone the other way. And there was actually a study that they did. They would play. The scientists were tracking these cougars with some collars on them, and as they were getting close to the cougar, they would play podcasts. It was the Meat Eater podcast, but it was just people talking normal, and they would just play it on their speaker. And the flight distance, it was crazy. It beat any other noise that they would make. As soon as the animal recognizes a human, they don't want anything. They don't want any part of that. Now, I will tell you, in some of those more developed areas, when you're in Yellowstone, obviously the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, with places with gobs and gobs of people, those animals become habituated where they kind of disregard humans. They just don't even think about them anymore. So they don't have that fear factor. But in truly wild areas, the human voice is the best thing that you could use against an animal. So, um, okay, we got a couple. I'm so excited. First, Trish wrote something. Um, Sadly, I have no fun bear story, but I was super excited when I was at Natural Bridge, Virginia last year in autumn. I was sitting under a persimmon tree basking in the fading sunlight. When I got up to walk back to my original spot, I was sitting right next to bear poop. The most exciting I could be for some poop, and I actually took a picture of it. Maybe next time I can spot the bear. I tell you what, those are really cool stories when you have close encounters that you don't even know you had a close encounter. Last week I was talking about the bear unseen, and I knew a bear was close, but I never did see it. So Trish, I thank you for that. That's yeah, whatever gets your blood boiling is awesome. Then Kay wrote again. Many years ago in Glacier, the rangers said they had a unique method of managing bears. They closed trails if there was bear activity. Bears took precedence. If it was a more if it was a bear more comfortable being with humans, they brought out Russian bear dogs, Karelian bear dogs, shot beanbags, did the yelling and the bear spray. According to the rangers in the ranger talks, the Glacier Rangers said they had the most effective bear management program. I'm talking 10 to 15 years ago. Yeah, aversive conditioning techniques. I think Greg mentioned it last time. They work up to a certain point. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But they can be very effective, but they could also not be. A lot depends on the individual bear. Um, Gene has a story for us, but Greg, did you have any? Or
So I was just going to say, the glacier stuff. I know one person who's worked there, and surprisingly, Daryl, you'd be surprised. They catch about one bear maybe every couple years for any kind of management reason. They may catch some for some research purposes here and there, but they're pretty hands off with bears these days in Glacier. And part of that, in my opinion, just kind of like Yellowstone. When I was there, we caught very few bears for any conflict, and in my opinion, it's those bears live in some of the best most undisturbed contiguous wilderness bear habitat in the US that we have left to offer.
yeah,
If you've got a lot of conflict in those places, It's strange because those bears have almost 95% of the landscape still intact for their use versus, a bear in the Smokies. So, some of the Canadians I've interacted with and people in Montana and Wyoming, Idaho, they'll be like, oh, yeah, we chased those bears off. I'm like, did the bear even get food? It's like, the bear was just in the area. It's like, yeah, that's great. I mean, you don't have that food conditioning behavior to try and manage. A lot of times it's bears on natural food sources frequenting an area that's just being productive. And the bear still has a pretty healthy fear of people. And so you can close the trail, close the area, and let the bear have it. And it works really well. Is it effective for mitigating conflict? Yeah, but it's also just an effective way to preserve that bear's natural wild behavior. Conflict is always the result of just allowing or creating situations where more humans interact with them. So Glacier has very low human bear interaction in general, from what I know, just like Yellowstone.
Yeah. All right. I'm kind of excited here because one of our participants actually offered to share a story. So, Gene, I'm going to call you out. I see your microphone is already on. So, Gene, if you have a story you want to share, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So I live in Florida, and even though we have bears, we don't have I don't think a lot of human bear conflict. We have some, but uh that's not our animal of conflict. Our animal of conflict is, of course, the alligator. And but it's the same issue of people not respecting their space, people feeding them where they lose their fear of humans, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of the same thing as bears. The problem of, as always, is the humans. So I was kayaking with a friend of mine on the Econlockhatchee in Orlando, in Central Florida, which is a freshwater river. It doesn't flow very swiftly, but it does have a current. And it's a freshwater river. It's tannic. So even though the water is actually clear, it's very brown because of the vegetation. So it's like paddling in tea. And so from where we launched to where we would take out was going to be about 8.5 miles. And it's through woods and farmland and stuff like that. I mean, basically, you don't get out. Well, you can. There's some sandbanks and stuff where you can get out if you want to. So we're paddling along, and I don't know how far we had already gone, maybe a mile or two. And we go around a meander, and there on one of the sandbanks is this absolutely gorgeous reptilian specimen. And probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 feet. And just sunning himself, having a good day. We were having a good day. He was having a good day. And then he decided to slide off the bank and join us. Now, the river's maybe 15 to 20 yards wide. It's not terribly wide. So we're paddling side by side, and this gator starts swimming beside us. And I start fumbling for my camera to get a picture of this big boy. And the next thing I know is I hear this crack like a rifle shot. Now, there's nobody out there but me and my friend, and neither one of us had a weapon with us. And I'm like, and then the gator just whoosh, splashed down, gone, and I didn't get a picture of him. And I'm like, what was that? And my companion had slapped the side of her kayak with her paddle, which produced that rifle shot sound, which scared the gator. I was fine with him swimming alongside of us. He wasn't bothering us, and we weren't bothering him. But anyway, um, that's the thing about gators is they're afraid of us unless they've been fed.
Yeah.
And so don't know where he went. Maybe he went back to a sandbank. I don't know, because after that we never saw it, and we couldn't see him in the water. But he was like, "I'm out of here," and that's something that people don't realize about alligators is they don't want anything to do with us. We are not in their food chain.
I, that was an awesome story. I give you credit. Alligators are out of my league. I've never dealt with them, but what you said is just so true on so many things. I teach a lot about bears. I also do a lot about cougars, and you just hear so many people talk about how there's man eaters out there, and it's like that is so far from the truth because if humans were on the menu, we would be waking up every day to news stories of different people being eaten by these animals because when you think about the number of times we walk by these animals and don't even realize it, if we were part of their diet, they would have no problem whatsoever taking us out. So it's only those extremely, extremely rare situations, especially if the animal's been fed by humans or if it's really stressed out and starving to death. But yeah, there's a lot of overblown hype regarding some of these animals being so dangerous. Don't get me wrong, they can be, but for the most part, they're not. But
It
cool.
can be,
Yeah.
but in almost every bad human alligator confrontation, the human did something stupid.
Yeah.
Just remember, in Florida, if there's water, there's an alligator. Every pond, every puddle, there's an alligator in it.
One of the things I teach, especially with bear safety, so many people think, oh, I don't need to know how to react around a bear because I'm not going to be hiking in the backcountry far away from other people. And it's like, guys, if you live in bear country, you could be taking your garbage out to the end of the driveway and run into a bear. So, yeah, more and more people learning how to react when they encounter these things would definitely do us and them a favor. So, thanks for that story, Gene. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Does anyone have anything else? Greg, I really appreciate you joining in. I wish you luck whatever
Yeah.
you're doing in Montana.
Oh, I'm elk hunting. Yeah, so I'm gonna be in the Blacktail Mountains in southwest Montana with a friend of mine I used to work with in the Smokies. He works in Montana now, and we're either gonna go for a really pretty cold hike and some brutal weather for 5 days, or I'll have elk meat to bring home
I
and go to a pretty cold, miserable hike for 5 days.
I
So
I was telling my brother the same thing yesterday because we're hoping to do the same thing next year. And I said, don't even think that you're going elk hunting. Just go with the notion you're going on a really cold, exhausting hike.
yeah, a good.
If we get
It's just
lucky,
a
we
yeah.
get lucky.
It's
So,
a cold backpacking trip and there's a chance you might come home with something else, so yeah, but we're bored in here, so I got to get going. But
okay.
Katrina's probably got a story to share. We should call her out, make her share one, but I got
Oh,
to
by
go.
all means,
So
Katrina.
all right, see you guys.
See you, Greg.
Bye.
Funny enough, as much as many my and this is kind of based off of what you were saying, Daryl, a little bit, but I worked in the backcountry office for a year as a park ranger, and before that, I was one of the bear technicians, a seasonal bear technician for 2 years in the Smokies. And it's kind of funny how few bears I saw hiking. Like, I mean, I've hiked. I mean, I'm not a 100 miler by any means. There's about 900 miles of trail in the Smokies, and it's a whole big thing if you hike all of them. But for between, you know, getting trash from backcountry campsites that people have left to going to closed campsites where there's aggressive bear activity to, we were the they don't do the whole people go stay in the backcountry to check if there are bears anymore that are showing up to campsites. That we just set up a dummy tent and a trail camera. That actually happened after an intern got dragged out of his tent by a bear.
Was
So
that Blake?
luckily, hmm,
Was that Blake?
I don't know his name, Daryl.
Okay,
Uh,
because
but
I remember one of them had that happen to him.
I think that was the only one, so it probably was Blake. And because Bill always made jokes, he's like, if you guys are, not doing hard, if you're not working hard enough, I'm gonna make you go sleep in a dummy tent. Um, but anyway, so the biggest bear, one of the bear encounters I had in the Smokies, as far as like camping outdoors, was actually Greg and I went to Elkmont Campground to go catch a bear that had gotten into somebody's tent and actually got some dog food the night before, and it was a front country camp, so it was where all the cars are parked and things like that. So it was a very bold bear. Um, and we knew it had gotten a food reward, which means that the likelihood of it being back that next night was pretty high. And so we were tasked with staying there overnight, just in case the bear came in, because it happened at like 3 a.m. the evening, or I guess the morning before. So we decided we were just going to camp in the back of the truck. Um, no, I mean, a tent is irrelevant at that point because it's just I feel like it makes us feel better, and you keep mosquitoes off of you and things like that. But it's not gonna stop a bear if he's interested enough. So we're open camping, I guess. And we're sitting there, and we have thermal scopes, so it's a little bit more advanced technology, and we all of a sudden we hear, this crack of stick breaking, and we see this bear just, which we can only assume was the same bear because he just literally beelines it to the same campsite, like doesn't blink twice. And immediately, like you see him crest over this little hill, and then you hear the bear trap slam shut, like all within like a minute and a half. So we feel very confident that this was the bear. We couldn't, you can't ever really prove it until morning when you can actually see the bear and see characteristics maybe that people had described. Um, but we brought it back to the building, came back with another bear trap just in case. Because it is possible with how many bears there are in that area that you could have caught a bear that was not, your target bear, if you will. So then the rest of the night, I was just laying wide awake in the back of the truck bed, just waiting for another bear to come because I was like, well, like, shoot, I'm not gonna be able to sleep a wink. So a couple hours later, it was like 1 or 2 a.m. I hear sticks cracking like right next to the truck. And I'm just sweating. Might have peed myself a little bit because I'm a Wisconsin girl. I did not grow up around bears, southern Wisconsin. And I grabbed the thermal. I said, Greg, wake up, wake up. And sure enough, it was this tiny little coyote that just, ran right across, behind us. And we didn't see anything else the whole night, but I was wide awake the entire time waiting for another bear to come by. It ended up probably being the bear that we were trying to get, the first time. But I was never too sure. I was waiting for something else to come.
Your mind can be the scariest thing out there. Like when you start thinking of all the different things, man, I've been in the woods at night a couple of times, and I'm like I'm working myself up and you got to try to clear your mind because you can scare the crap out of yourself, and if you stepped on a grouse or a bird that flushed, you who knows what would happen because you can work yourself up pretty bad with your own thoughts sometimes. So, well, look at that. We're under an hour, Tori.
No, it
Unless you,
was perfect. It was
unless you,
perfect. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Text or audio. We really appreciate you guys participating. So that was great. And I think so we are going to take a break. So in 2 weeks is the day
oh,
before
is it
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving? Okay.
And so I actually just push it to the next week. So it'll be December 3rd when we meet again.
So, see you in 3 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. And have a great Thanksgiving, everybody, if you celebrate.
Yeah, and we'll see you in about 3 weeks. So, I'm glad you can join us.
Thanks, Daryl.
Bye, guys.
Bye.